Elijah Carter walked into the luxury car showroom like any other customer, but from the very first moment, he knew he wasn't welcome. There was no polite greeting, no professional smile, just a quick, assessing glance from the sales staff. Wearing a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans, Elijah looked like an ordinary middle-aged man, lacking the flashy wealth this place expected from its clientele. The showroom gleamed under bright LED lights, reflecting off cars worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The scent of premium leather mixed with the aroma of high-end coffee, creating an atmosphere designed for the elite. At the reception desk, a young woman barely lifted her head when Elijah approached. Keeping his voice calm, he said, "I'd like to see the Bentley Continental GT." She glanced up briefly, frowned, then looked him up and down as if he had just asked for something far beyond his financial reach. "We only show our cars to customers with an appointment," she replied coolly. "You might find something more within your budget at the used car lot about 5 miles from here." Elijah stayed silent, feeling anger rise in his chest. He wasn't just witnessing discrimination. He knew without a doubt that this wasn't the first time this dealership had treated someone like this. This was unacceptable, and they were about to pay for it. Elijah Carter stood still for a moment, his jaw tightening as he processed the receptionist's words. He wasn't surprised. He had seen this kind of treatment before. But knowing it and experiencing it firsthand were two different things. His fingers curled slightly at his sides, but he forced himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't do any good. No, he had a better idea. With a measured breath, he pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. The receptionist barely paid attention, already dismissing him as just another man who didn't belong. But that changed the moment the manager's office door swung open and a sharply dressed man stepped out. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he approached, his expression shifting the second he recognized Elijah. "Mr. Carter, what a surprise!" The manager's voice carried the forced enthusiasm of someone scrambling to fix a mistake. "If I had known you were coming, I would have prepared something special." Elijah turned slowly, his gaze steady. "I don't recall needing an appointment just to look at a car." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. The receptionist's face paled. She looked between Elijah and her boss, realizing too late that she had just dismissed someone important. The manager cleared his throat, his nervousness barely hidden. "Of course not. Please, right this way." Elijah didn't move. Instead, he glanced at the woman behind the desk, the one who had spoken to him as if he were beneath her. "I was told I should check the used car lot instead. Maybe that's where you think I belong?" His words were sharp, cutting through the forced hospitality like a blade. The receptionist stammered, her confidence from earlier vanishing. I didn't mean—" "Oh, you meant exactly what you said," Elijah interrupted, his voice steady but unforgiving. "And I'd bet good money I'm not the first person you've treated like this." The manager shifted uncomfortably. "I sincerely apologize, Mr. Carter. This isn't how we operate." Elijah let out a short, humorless laugh. "Spare me the speech. If this isn't how you operate, then why does it keep happening?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Customers in the showroom, who had previously ignored the interaction, were now paying attention. Some whispered, some looked away awkwardly, but all of them felt the weight of what was happening. Elijah could have walked away then, but that wasn't enough. He wasn't just here for himself. He was here for everyone who had been treated like they didn't belong. "I'm still interested in the Bentley," he said, his voice cool, "but I'll be buying it from a dealership that actually values its customers." And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving behind a silence heavier than any apology could fix. The moment Elijah Carter stepped out of the dealership, a fire burned in his chest. This wasn't just about a car. It wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, and told, explicitly or not, that they didn't belong. As he walked toward his own sleek black Mercedes, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down. Noelle Simmons. She had been his closest friend since college, a fierce attorney who had built her career tearing down systemic discrimination wherever it thrived. If there was anyone who would understand his frustration, it was her. "Tell me you didn't let it slide," Noelle's voice came through the speaker the moment he answered. Elijah let out a breath, shaking his head as he slid into the driver's seat. Not entirely, but walking out doesn't change the system. They'll keep doing it to the next guy. Noelle's pause was brief, but he could hear the wheels turning in her mind. You're right, but we can make sure the world sees exactly how they treat people like us. Elijah didn't need her to spell it out. He had already considered it. He glanced at the dealership behind him, the giant glass windows reflecting a business that thrived on wealth and prestige, at least for the people they deem worthy. I'll call my media contacts, Noelle continued, her tone crisp with determination. We'll put them on blast. Let's see how their customers feel when they realize their money goes to a business that decides who's important based on appearance alone. Elijah's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He had spent years building his reputation, proving himself in boardrooms filled with men who barely acknowledged him until he outperformed them. He had done everything right. And still, moments like today reminded him that, in the eyes of some, he would never be enough. Do it, he said, his voice firm. Let's make them answer for it. By the time the sun set, social media was ablaze. Videos circulated of Elijah's encounter at the dealership, exposing every dismissive glance, every condescending word. The dealership's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Their official statement, a hollow apology about misunderstandings, only fueled the outrage. The next morning, Elijah's inbox was flooded. News outlets wanted interviews. Prominent figures voiced their support. And then the dealership's owner himself called. Elijah stared at the phone for a long moment before answering. Mr. Carter, the man's voice was overly polite, laced with nervous energy. I'd like to personally apologize. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss how we can make things right. Elijah let the silence stretch before replying. Now you want to talk? His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Tell me, would you have called if the world hadn't been watching? Elijah let the dealership owner's question hang in the air. He knew exactly why the man was calling. It wasn't regret. It wasn't self-reflection. It was fear. The fear of losing profits, reputation, and the carefully curated image of exclusivity that had just been shattered overnight. Mr. Carter, the owner pressed, his voice tight, I understand your frustration, and I want to assure you that this is not representative of our values. We take these matters very seriously. Elijah scoffed. You take them seriously now because your name is being dragged through the mud. A beat of silence. Then the man sighed. Look, let's not turn this into a bigger issue than it has to be. We'd like to offer you a private meeting, just you and me. We can discuss this like professionals. Elijah's jaw clenched. It was the same patronizing tone he had heard 1,000 times before, a subtle reminder that people like him should be reasonable, that they should accept a quiet, backroom apology in exchange for silence. But Elijah had no intention of being quiet. There's nothing to discuss, he said. I don't need a personal apology. I need to know what you're going to do to fix the culture of your business. The owner hesitated. We're reviewing our policies. No, you're reacting. Elijah cut him off. What happens when the headlines fade? When social media moves on? Will your staff go back to making assumptions about who deserves respect? The owner exhaled sharply. What do you want? Elijah had already decided. A public admission. Not just an empty PR statement, but real accountability. A commitment to diversity training, actual changes in hiring and promotion practices, and a meeting, not just with me, but with community leaders, business professionals who have been through the same thing. A long pause. The owner was calculating, weighing his options. And if we do this, will you stop pushing the story? Elijah's laughter was cold. This isn't about damage control. This is about change. You don't get to buy your way out of this. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then reluctantly, the owner spoke. I'll have my team draft a statement. Not good enough, Elijah replied. You'll draft it, you'll own it, and you'll follow through. The call ended, but Elijah knew this was just the beginning. Across social media, the conversation had ignited something bigger. Stories poured in, people sharing their own encounters with businesses that judged them before they even spoke. This wasn't just about one dealership anymore. It was about a system, and Elijah wasn't backing down. As the days passed, the dealership's public statement hit the internet, a carefully worded admission of the incident, a promise to implement diversity training, and a commitment to fostering inclusivity. But Elijah wasn't satisfied. Words were easy. Action was harder. He watched as comments flooded in. Some praised the dealership's response, calling it a step in the right direction. Others saw it for what it was, damage control. And then there were those who dismissed the issue entirely, blaming Elijah for making everything about race or blowing things out of proportion. "Why couldn't you just accept the apology and move on?" one commenter wrote. Elijah exhaled sharply, setting his phone down. Move on? As if this was an isolated incident, as if it hadn't happened 100 times before, to him, to others. He thought of the messages he had received, stories from people who had been denied service, spoken down to, followed around in stores, treated like they didn't belong. No, this wasn't over. A local journalist reached out, asking for an interview. Elijah agreed, but only under one condition. He wouldn't just tell his own story. He would share the voices of others who had experienced the same prejudice. The article went live 2 days later. It wasn't just about Elijah's confrontation at the dealership. It was about a pattern. It was about the unspoken rules that dictated who was welcome in certain spaces and who wasn't. It was about the quiet humiliations people endured, the way they were expected to just take it, to shrug it off, to not make waves. And then something unexpected happened. Other businesses in the area began speaking out. Some openly condemned the dealership's actions, pledging to review their own policies. Others shared their own struggles with bias, owners admitting that they too had blind spots that needed to be addressed. The shift was small at first, but it grew. A community forum was organized, bringing together business leaders, activists, and everyday citizens. Elijah attended, watching as people voiced their frustrations, their hopes, their expectations for real change. And for the first time, the dealership owner, who had spent so much time trying to control the narrative, stood before the community and listened. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start. As Elijah stepped outside after the meeting, the cool night air grounding him, he knew this fight wasn't over. Change didn't happen overnight. It took persistence. It took people refusing to be silent. And Elijah was done being silent. Elijah knew that change wasn't just about one conversation, one article, or one forum. It had to be sustained. It had to be more than just words. And if no one else was going to lead the charge, he would. In the weeks following the community forum, Elijah took action. He partnered with a local advocacy group to create an initiative aimed at holding businesses accountable for fair and unbiased treatment of customers. They launched a website where people could anonymously report discrimination and share their experiences. It didn't take long for submissions to pour in. Stories of profiling, refusals of service, and outright hostility. The data was undeniable. Patterns emerged exposing certain businesses that consistently engaged in discriminatory practices. With that information, Elijah and his team put pressure on local officials, demanding stronger regulations and clearer consequences for violations. The city council took notice, agreeing to review policies and implement new guidelines to prevent racial bias in businesses. At the same time, Elijah continued speaking out. He was invited to panel discussions, featured in local news segments, and even asked to consult with businesses on how to improve inclusivity. What had started as a single incident at a car dealership had ignited something bigger, a movement that people could no longer ignore. But not everyone welcomed the change. Elijah received hate messages, threats from anonymous accounts telling him to stay in his lane. Some businesses pushed back, claiming they were being unfairly targeted. Yet for every voice trying to silence him, there were dozens more standing beside him. This was no longer just his fight. It belonged to the community, and Elijah had no intention of backing down. The story of Elijah is a powerful reminder that real change starts with courage and persistence. It shows that injustice, no matter how deeply ingrained, can be challenged when people refuse to stay silent. One key lesson is the importance of speaking up, even when it's uncomfortable. Many injustices persist simply because no one is willing to confront them. Another takeaway is the power of collective action. Elijah's fight wasn't just his own. It became a movement because people stood together. Change is rarely achieved alone, but when communities unite, Their voices become impossible to ignore. Lastly, the story highlights resilience in the face of opposition. Pushback is inevitable when challenging the status quo, but progress only happens when we refuse to back down. In today's world, whether it's discrimination, inequality, or systemic bias, we all have a role to play. Speak up, take action, and never let fear silence what's right. Thank you for watching the video. Please comment with number 1 to let me know you have watched the whole video. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to always receive new videos as soon as possible.